Ms. Simrin Singh, the Country Director of Sri Lanka and Maldives for ILO. Over to you, Ms. Simrin Singh. Sri Lanka has already ratified the conventions of minimum age, and also the worst forms of child labor as well. So you can further extend the knowledge on child labor and the Sri Lanka situation in this moment.
It's very good to join all of you today to mark this very important World Day Against Child Labor, which is actually tomorrow. But I'm pleased to see that we are joining here today to really show again how we need to redouble our commitment to ending child labor in all its forms around the world, but here especially in Sri Lanka, because a lot of progress has been made. We have the last mile or few kilometers to go. Times are not that straightforward right now with the complications of COVID and other challenges economically for the country. But this does not mean that Sri Lanka will stop in its efforts to end child labor, because it's a firm commitment at the highest level being given. And I'm very pleased also, Honorable Minister, that you will be joining globally, also showcasing Sri Lanka at the global high-level event taking place later on to mark World Day Against Child Labor. So it's really an honor that Sri Lanka is represented also on this global panel. Let me just start by unfortunately sharing some very sobering news. Yesterday, the ILO, together with UNICEF, released global estimates. We do this every 4 years of how many children are in child labor around the world. It's based on surveys from over 100 countries. And unfortunately, the numbers have gone up. And this is different from what it used to be. For the last 15, 20 years, we've seen a steady decline in child labor around the world. But unfortunately, this time around, given the economic downturn, given COVID, and also the lack of an adequate investment in social protection systems, as well as issues related to children's continuing lack of access and staying in education systems, we have seen a rise. At this point in time, we've seen 8.4 million more children in child labor than before. So we're talking 160 million children around the world in child labor. And that's a very staggering number, especially after the continuing decline over 2 decades. 50%, this is very scary as well, 50% of these children in child labor are now in the age group of 5 years old to 11. We used to previously see a lot more in the slightly older age range, but 50% in 5 to 11 is a really alarming figure. And we also have seen a rise in children between the ages of 5 and 17 years in hazardous work. That stands at 80 million children doing hazardous work. That's half, again, 50% of all children in child labor are in hazardous forms, the worst forms of child labor. So, it's really not looking good, and it needs a bit more investment in particularly a few areas. And I think Sri Lanka is no different in some ways, and has to also redouble when it looks at the kind of solutions to make the steady progress and achieve the goal that Sri Lanka has committed and set itself to, which is by next year, in fact, 2022, to eliminate the worst forms of child labor. And by globally, as you know, according to the Sustainable Development Goals, the commitment globally is to have all forms of child labor eliminated by the year 2025. So we're not talking much time, but the right kind of investments, the right kind of commitment, the right type of action from all sorts of stakeholders, all of you, of course, but also spanning across people working at the grassroots level is very, very essential. And I think 2 areas are very critical in the context of Sri Lanka. One is on education and keeping children in schools. The commitment to increase the minimum age for employment to 16 comes with also the commitment to keep children in school to the age of 16. And if they're in school, chances are they're also not doing hazardous forms of child labor. So how can we keep these children in school? there was already a challenge of dropout rates of children or children that were, not sticking through the education course. Now, with the 13-year education and the increased minimum age, this effort is going to require a lot more effort, especially at the school level and at the community level, to keep children in school. The second area is social protection. We know that there is some worthy plans and there are grants given, but especially in the context of COVID, and given in Sri Lanka, most enterprises are still operating in the informal sector, which means they are not protected often either by the laws or by receiving social protection. It's really important that we bring those that are in the informal sector, those that are unemployed as a result of COVID, into the social protection system so that they can offset the costs, the opportunity costs of keeping children in school and their own livelihoods, and not faced with poverty to be pushing children into school. Now, the COVID crisis has been really significant. The ILO has already indicated that there's a risk of 9 million more children entering child labor because of COVID. Again, this is global. But what's even scarier is that based on a projection or simulation model, they believe that if actions aren't taken, especially on, again, education and social protection, as well as things like rural infrastructure, rural development, agricultural development, you could see the number increase to 46 million. So right now, 9 million at risk, but according to projection models, in a situation of no actions taken by member states and countries, we're looking at, again, a rise of 46 million. So this is really having an exponential risk of COVID, and we're very aware of it. And Sri Lanka is not immune, of course, to also COVID. So this is the year, as we know, of the International Year of Elimination of Child Labor. Sri Lanka has made a very, very significant and important action pledge globally as well. And again here, Sri Lanka is considered a pathfinder country when it comes to the elimination of child labor and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals target 8.7, which is to end child labor in all its forms soon. So I think the time is now for sure to bring on board even more actors and to continue and redouble efforts. I would urge, I think very importantly, to capture data on the situation of child labor, because this is something that has not been captured in Sri Lanka since the year 2016. It's been 5 years. So to achieve the very ambitious goal of zero child labor, which Sri Lanka has committed to, we need to know what we're measuring against. So I really do hope that this year of international child labor, that efforts can be made to capture the kind of data needed. Second, I really do hope also that every effort is made that children that were already dropped out before COVID, or have dropped out or have no access because of online learning and things, that every effort is made that those children keep in school, stay in school, come back to school. And as I mentioned, if social protection efforts can be doubled, especially to reach parents whose livelihoods have been affected, that are operating in the informal sector in particular, that would really make a huge difference to keep and to achieve the targets. I think I'll end on that. I'm sorry I don't have extremely positive news from around the world. My own personal engagement with child labor spans over 20 years with the ILO. And I always felt very good every 4 years of all the efforts that had been put in when we saw a continuing decline in child labor. And unfortunately this year, these sobering figures of an increase, and not only an increase, but a grave risk because of COVID of even further exponential increase, really is calling on us to do everything we can and more to end child labor. Thank you for inviting me, and I am with you. The ILO is with you, as are many other entities around the world and here in Sri Lanka, to really help achieve this very important goal for the future of the children and the well-being of society and the country.